Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm really glad you could join us today because we're going to unpack something pretty central to the Catholic Church.
Mm.
An institution, that's vital but maybe not always fully understood in its, let's say, day-to-day impact.
Right.
We're talking about bishops' conferences.
And it's actually a really timely discussion, isn't it? Especially with that news coming out of the Philippines just now.
Exactly. The Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, the CBCP, they've just selected new officers.
Yeah, and the new head is Archbishop Gilbert Garcera of Lipa, Batangas.
Lipa, Batangas. Okay, for anyone familiar with church happenings in the Philippines, that name rings a bell, doesn't it?
It definitely does. It's famously connected to those alleged Marian aberrations back in 1948. The ones that have been really controversial for, well, decades now.
Right, the mediatrix of all grace apparitions, the rose petals, all of that.
Yeah.
And what's really noteworthy here is Archbishop Garcera himself. He's actually been quite consistent in his opposition to the phenomenon during his time there as Archbishop of Lipa. It's not like a new position for him.
No, he's been clear. And that creates a fascinating dynamic because, well, his predecessors didn't necessarily see it that way.
Right, like Archbishop Emeritus Ramon Arguelles. He was much more favorable, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He even approved the apparitions at one point, which was then overturned by Rome.
Yeah, that back and forth, the approval, the reversal, it just underscores how sensitive and, frankly, contentious that whole Lipa case remains within the church.
It really does. It's a complex piece of local church history.
And look, while that Lipa story is genuinely fascinating, maybe we should do a whole deep dive on just that someday.
To be interesting.
Yeah. But that's not really our main focus for this discussion. It just serves as a really timely kind of real-world backdrop.
Exactly. That opens a door to a much bigger conversation.
Right. So let's unpack this. We're diving into a really crucial discussion about bishops' conferences as an institution and asking, are they truly living up to their potential? Or have things, maybe despite good intentions, gone a bit awry in how they actually function?
What's fascinating here is how this specific news out of the Philippines provides a window into that much larger global conversation about authority and effectiveness within the church. We're looking at a compelling argument today, sourced from our key resource. The argument is that bishops' conferences, look, they were set up with undeniably good, noble intentions, but in practice, they frequently fail to serve the true good of the church as perhaps they were meant to.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at, the history, the canonical purpose, what the law actually says therefore, and then comparing that with the real-world impact we often see.
And this isn't about attacking bishops individually, right?
Not at all. It's a critical look at these powerful institutions, asking if they consistently help or if sometimes, maybe unintentionally, they actually create obstacles.
Okay, and where is this analysis coming from? We should definitely let people know.
Yes, absolutely. Our source for this deep dive is www.epistles.online.
Ah, yes, Epistles Online.
It's a fantastic resource, really, especially for Catholics looking for clarity, for a balanced view. It manages to be neither, rigidly modernist nor ultra-traditionalist.
Which is so valuable these days, finding that balanced, faithful perspective on complex church issues.
It really is.
So if you listening now are looking for more deep dives like this one, grounded in solid analysis, you should definitely subscribe. Go to the Epistles Online website and also subscribe to the Catholic Epistles podcast on, whatever platform you use.
And we really should give a proper shout out to the author behind Epistles Online. He puts an incredible amount of work into this apostolate, researching, writing, presenting these crucial topics. It's really his dedication that keeps this mission running and keeps it freely available for everyone.
That's a great point. So we warmly invite you, our listeners, to support his work if you can. Any support truly helps keep this important resource going.
Absolutely. It makes a real difference.
Okay, so with that foundation laid, let's start at the beginning, really. Let's ground ourselves in the fundamental understanding of what a bishop is, the sacred office itself.
Right.
Because when we think of a bishop, do we always grasp the sheer weight and uniqueness of his individual responsibility?
That's the perfect starting point, because it raises that crucial question right away. If a bishop holds such direct, immediate, God-given power, well, what role can a group like a conference legitimately play without somehow diminishing that?
Yeah.
Our source material really emphasizes this. The sacred, unique office of the bishop. Fundamentally, he isn't just an administrator or, a committee member. He is, first and foremost, a shepherd of souls.
A shepherd of souls, that sounds simple, but the implications are huge, aren't they? Theologically, practically.
Enormous. A bishop isn't just a delegate reporting back to some central committee. His role is far more direct, far more spiritual. He has a singular responsibility for his diocese.
And this isn't a new idea, is it? This goes way back.
Oh, absolutely. It's rooted right in the foundations of the church. You look at the New Testament, Christ entrusts Peter and the apostles directly with caring for his flock.
Yeah.
They weren't, forming subcommittees or taking votes in the same way we think of it now. They were appointed shepherds. And the early church fathers, people like St. Ignatius of Antioch writing way back in the early 2nd century.
Right.
He consistently stressed the bishop's unique role as the center of unity, the embodiment of Christ's authority for his local community, his diocese. This historical line just reinforces the profound individual nature of being a bishop.
And canon law, the church's own legal framework, spells this out pretty clearly too.
It does. Canon 381, paragraph 1. It's worth hearing the actual language. It says a diocesan bishop in the diocese entrusted to him has all the ordinary, proper, and immediate power required for the exercise of his pastoral office.
Ordinary, proper, and immediate power. That sounds really strong.
It is incredibly strong. Ordinary means it's attached to the office itself, not granted exceptionally. Proper means he exercises it in his own name, not as someone else's vicar or delegate. And immediate means he can exercise it directly over his faithful without needing an intermediary.
So it's not borrowed power, not delegated from a conference or anything like that.
Exactly. It's inherent to his office as a successor of the apostles. It comes with the job, so to speak, through his ordination and mission. The only limits are those reserved by canon law itself or by the Pope, the Supreme Pontiff.
And how does that differ from, say, leadership roles we see in the secular world?
Well, think about it. A CEO gets power from a board. A politician gets power from voters, and it's usually temporary. A bishop's authority is rooted in that direct line back to the apostles. He's entrusted with the direct care of his flock. His accountability is ultimately vertical to Christ and his vicar, the Pope. It's a spiritual mandate, not a corporate or political one. It's about spiritual fatherhood, that direct link.
The weight of that individual authority is just immense. When a bishop teaches or governs his diocese, he's doing it with that direct spiritual lineage, accountable to God.
Precisely. It's not a committee decision filtered down. It's his decision, his responsibility before God for the souls entrusted to him.
Which really sets the stage, doesn't it, for understanding why there might be tension when other structures, like these conferences, start playing a really big role.
It absolutely does. If a bishop is truly the spiritual head, tasked with teaching, sanctifying, governing with this immediate power, well, how do conferences fit in? Do they enhance that power? Or do they maybe sometimes dilute it?
That's the perfect transition. Because these conferences, at least in their current influential form, are relatively new in the grand sweep of church history.
That's right. Their role has definitely evolved.
So let's look at that. Their original intentions versus maybe the reality we see today. What were they meant to be?
Okay, so canon law again gives us the blueprint. Canon 447. It says a conference of bishops is, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, a group of bishops from a nation or territory who exercise certain pastoral functions together.
Certain functions, okay.
For the good of the faithful in their territory. The goal is to promote the greater good the church offers, especially through adapting the apostolate, the church's mission, to the specific circumstances of the time and place.
So the key words seem to be pastoral purposes, cooperation, unity, adapting the mission locally. It sounds positive, designed to help bishops work together.
Exactly. Inherently good intentions. The crucial distinction, though, which the canon implies and our source really highlights, is that they're meant to help cooperation. They're intended to assist unity and shared work.
Not to replace the bishop's own authority.
Precisely. They aren't meant to be a higher authority that supersedes the individual bishop in his diocese. Think of them as a tool for collaboration, for sharing ideas, maybe presenting a united voice on some public issues, but not a new layer of command. It's about cooperation, not coercion.
But, and this is the core of the argument we're exploring, the reality on the ground often seems quite different, doesn't it? Our source suggests a big gap between that intent and the actual function.
It does. And there's been a significant historical shift here. It's really important to remember this.
How so?
Well, look back at the 1917 Code of Canon Law, the one in force before Vatican II. It simply didn't talk about bishops' conferences in the way we know them now.
Really? They weren't even mentioned like this?
Not with this kind of structure or influence.
Mhm.
Before the council, governance was overwhelmingly focused on the individual bishop. He was seen as that direct successor of the apostles, exercising full jurisdiction in his diocese, accountable directly to the pope. There wasn't this powerful intervening layer of a national or regional conference shaping decisions or setting policy for individual dioceses in the same way. Bishops might have met, sure, maybe informally, but their authority remained fundamentally individual.
Wow. So the fact that the 1917 code didn't have them in this form really underscores how much things changed, especially after Vatican II. Now, these conferences seem to have enormous influence, sometimes even overshadowing the local bishop.
Tremendous influence. And the shift is complex. Vatican II rightly emphasized collegiality, the idea that bishops, together with the Pope, share responsibility for the universal church. That was positive, aimed at fostering unity.
Okay.
But one of the perhaps unintended consequences, as our source argues, is the way these conferences grew into these large, often bureaucratic entities. And in practice, they can dilute that individual authority we just talked about.
So the central question from the source is, what? Did it put it bluntly?
Pretty bluntly, yes. Do bishops' conferences, as they operate now, actually weaken the personal responsibility of each bishop? And even more provocatively, did the church perhaps thrive more when bishops led more independently, guided directly by the Holy Spirit, rather than by a group consensus?
That's a strong question, and it points to potential downsides. The source uses the phrase mere administrators instead of true shepherds. That's a really fundamental shift in identity.
It is. Moving from that spiritual fatherhood, that direct divine mandate, to something that can feel more like, well, managing a branch office according to directives from headquarters, or like being on a corporate board. When major decisions get made by majority vote in a conference, it inevitably shifts the dynamic. It's less about one shepherd discerning God's will for his specific flock and courageously leading, and more about a committee trying to find a common denominator, a consensus, maybe even a compromise.
And that compromise might not fit every diocese, or might not be the boldest stance required by the faith.
Exactly. And the source delves into the psychological impact, too. What happens when an individual bishop feels, maybe subtly, maybe overtly, forced to follow the opinion of a crowd?
Peer pressure, basically. Or just the difficulty of being the odd one out.
Could be peer pressure, could be a genuine desire for unity that gets twisted, could be the practical headaches of not conforming to conference guidelines or programs. But the question is, where does that brave and clear voice that speaks the truth go in that environment?
Does the structure itself inadvertently stifle that kind of prophetic leadership?
That's the core concern, the potential for the conference structure, meant for good, to actually mute the courageous individual voice of the shepherd guided by the Holy Spirit. Because the collective isn't automatically guaranteed to embody the Holy Spirit's wisdom. It's still a human group susceptible to dynamics, politics, maybe even external pressures.
Right, so the intention was cooperation for the good, but if it morphs into conformity.
Then it starts to chip away at that unique apostolic authority affirmed in Canon 381. The worry is that instead of strengthening the church through collaboration, it might weaken its foundational leadership by diffusing responsibility and silencing those courageous voices. The balance might have tilted too far.
Okay, this theoretical framework is clear, but it becomes much more concrete when we look at specific examples. Our source provides some case studies, right, where these potential problems seem to manifest.
Indeed. Let's start in the U.S. with the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. The source brings up the example of Bishop Joseph Strickland, who was then the Bishop of Tyler, Texas.
Ah, yes, Bishop Strickland.
He made a proposal, quite bravely, that the USCCB should formally recognize abortion as the preeminent moral issue of our time.
Okay, a clear moral stance, emphasizing the gravity of abortion above other important issues. What happened?
According to the source, his proposal was met with silence.
It's
Silence.
from the whole
A
conference.
bishop makes a strong stand on what many Catholics see as the foundational right-to-life issue, and nothing. That's the picture painted by the source. A righteous proposal, essentially ignored or shelved by the collective body. It immediately makes you ask, well, why? What's driving the agenda, if not clear moral principles?
And does the source offer an explanation for that silence?
It offers a pretty stark one. It suggests, and I quote, perhaps because the conference relies on funds from groups that promote ideas opposed to Catholic teaching.
Wow. Okay, that's a serious claim. Does it get more specific?
It does. It specifically mentions a revelation that the Catholic Church in the U.S. at one point received significant funding from USAID.
USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development.
That's the one. An organization which, as the source puts it bluntly, has no interest at all in the salvation of souls. Now, USAID does humanitarian work, but historically some of its funding, particularly around global health and population programs, has involved initiatives concerning reproductive health that are directly contrary to Catholic teaching.
So the implication is a direct financial conflict of interest, that the conference might hesitate to take a strong stand, like declaring abortion preeminent, if it could jeopardize funding from an entity like USAID.
That's precisely the implication drawn by the source. It suggests a potential external financial entanglement that could lead to a kind of self-censorship, prioritizing worldly connections or funding streams over proclaiming moral truth without compromise.
That paints a picture of the conference potentially being influenced, or at least constrained, by considerations completely outside its spiritual mandate.
Exactly. It illustrates that risk where external factors, financial or perhaps political, might subtly or not so subtly shape the conference's actions or inactions, potentially muting the clear voice needed on critical moral issues. It raises the question, whose greater good is being served then?
And this isn't just an American issue, you're saying. Let's go back to the Philippines, the CBCP, which kicked off our discussion. This source sees similar dynamics there.
Yes, regarding that very controversial LIPA phenomenon we mentioned,
Right.
the source claims, based on its information, that around 80% of Filipino bishops privately believe the LIPA apparitions deserve respect and deeper study.
80%. That's a huge majority, privately holding that view.
An overwhelming majority, yes. They privately feel these alleged apparitions involving Mary, mediatrix of all grace back in 48, warrant more serious consideration, despite the history of controversy and Roman interventions.
Okay, so you have this widespread private sentiment among the bishops themselves.
Right, but then the source states that because of the influence of a few powerful figures in the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, CBCP, this phenomenon has not received the fair consideration it deserves on a conference level.
So a powerful few within the conference structure are allegedly blocking what the majority privately desires.
That's the assertion. And again, let's be clear for our listeners. We are not taking a stance on whether the LIPA apparitions are true or not. That's for the Church to discern.
Right. The point is the process, the conference dynamic.
Exactly. The point here is how the conference structure itself and its internal politics can apparently prevent an issue from getting open, fair consideration, even when most individual bishops might want that. It shows how internal power dynamics, maybe a few influential voices, can effectively silence or sideline the broader episcopal will.
It's like a bottleneck. The collective sentiment doesn't translate into collective action because of the structure or personalities involved.
Precisely. It highlights that risk of silencing of voices within the conference itself, not just external pressures. A few key figures can potentially control the agenda or obstruct initiatives favored by many others.
So we're seeing a pattern emerge here, aren't we? Whether it's potential financial conflicts in the U.S. or internal power dynamics in the Philippines, the outcome seems to be that the conference doesn't always reflect the collective wisdom or courage of its individual members.
That seems to be the argument, and the source extends this observation to Europe as well.
What's the situation there, according to the source?
The observation is that in Europe, quite often, faithful bishops are often silenced. Their rightful authority, that immediate power we discussed, is limited by conferences that bow to modern ideas under the name of pastoral sensitivity.
Ah, pastoral sensitivity. That phrase comes up a lot.
It does, and the source sees it sometimes used as cover. We see this debated intensely in places like Germany with their synodal path.
Right, where the conference has been pushing discussions on very contentious issues, blessing same-sex unions, women's ordination, changing celibacy rules.
Exactly, and often the justification given is the need to be more pastorally sensitive to modern people, to contemporary culture.
But that term, pastoral sensitivity, can be a double-edged sword, can't it?
Yeah.
Genuine compassion is vital, obviously, but it can also be used to justify, well, compromising on things the Church has always taught.
That's the critical tension. Where does true pastoral care end, and where does compromising core doctrine begin? The danger highlighted by the source is when conferences become vehicles for importing ideas that are actually contrary to Catholic tradition, rather than being bulwarks defending it.
So the conference, instead of supporting the bishop in upholding timeless truths, might pressure him to conform to contemporary trends.
That's the risk. If the collective body starts prioritizing social acceptance or avoiding conflict by softening doctrine, it fundamentally undermines the church's mission. It allows the crowd, as the source puts it, to dictate terms, rather than the Holy Spirit guiding the bishops.
Which raises huge questions about doctrinal integrity and the spiritual health of the faithful if conferences become susceptible to these pressures, effectively marginalizing bishops who want to stand firm on tradition.
It really does. It paints a challenging picture of how these structures, intended for support, can sometimes become obstacles to the church's core mission and the bishop's own God-given role.
It sounds quite pessimistic in some ways, but the source doesn't just leave it there, right? It does offer some hope, a path forward.
Oh yes, definitely. It's not presented as a hopeless situation. The source clearly states that bishops' conferences are not beyond hope. They absolutely can serve a noble purpose. They can foster genuine collaboration and provide a unified, faithful voice.
Okay, so what's required for them to function well? What are the conditions?
The condition is crystal clear and non-negotiable, according to the source. They can only be truly beneficial when they stay faithful to tradition and true Catholic teaching. Fidelity is the absolute key. Without that shared foundation, the potential for dysfunction just skyrockets.
So it's not about getting rid of conferences, but about ensuring they operate within the bounds of faithfulness, serving their intended purpose.
Exactly. It's about reform, about ensuring they amplify rather than dilute the authentic teaching and mission of the Church through the bishops.
And does the source give an example of a conference that is working well, that embodies this kind of faithful collaboration?
It does. It points to SECAM, the Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar, as a bright example.
SECAM, give the African conferences. What did they do that stands out?
Their most prominent recent action, highlighted by the source, was how they responded to fiducious supplicans. They courageously rejected implementing the blessings for same-sex couples outlined in that document.
Right, fiducia supplicans, the declaration from the Vatican's Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith about blessings for couples in irregular situations, that caused a huge stir globally.
It absolutely did. Issued in late 2023, it tried to distinguish between liturgical blessings and informal pastoral blessings, allowing the latter for couples not in valid marriages, including same-sex couples, but it immediately generated widespread confusion and concern. Many bishops worried it undermined the Church's clear teaching on marriage between one man and one woman. SECAM's response was remarkably swift and unified. They issued a consolidated statement basically saying that implementing such blessings in Africa would cause scandal and confusion given the cultural context and the strong emphasis on traditional marriage. They effectively said, we cannot do this here without compromising the understanding of marriage.
So they stood firm on doctrine and pastoral clarity for their specific context, even though the document came from a Vatican dicastery. That is courageous.
Extremely courageous. And it provides that powerful blueprint we were talking about.
Yeah.
It shows that when a conference unites around core doctrine, around fidelity, it can act decisively and serve the true good of the Church. It doesn't have to lead to compromise or dilution.
What does the SECAM example teach us then about how a conference should work?
It teaches that unity and faithfulness is achievable and incredibly impactful. It requires courage, yes, especially if it means resisting pressure or differing opinions elsewhere. But SECAM showed that when bishops unite to affirm and defend church teaching and protect their flock from confusion, the conference becomes a powerful force for good. It reinforces the idea that the greater good they're meant to serve is always tied to fidelity to Christ, not to conforming to external pressures or watering down truth for sensitivity's sake. It's a strong counter-narrative to the dysfunctions we discussed. It shows the potential realized.
This deep dive has really illuminated the complexities, hasn't it?
Yeah.
These church structures, like bishops' conferences, they're not simple.
Not at all.
And while they were intended for good cooperation, Unity the Source makes a strong case that, in practice, many of them can become obstacles to the true authority of individual bishops. And that final warning from the source is really sobering. Unless these conferences are made up of truly saintly bishops who care only about the salvation of souls, they risk becoming tools for political games and worldly concerns.
It brings us right back to that core tension. The vital, irreplaceable individual shepherd versus the collective structure. The source really pushes us to ask if the structure, designed for good, sometimes inadvertently gets in the way of the shepherd's voice, his direct responsibility.
Does the mechanism for unity sometimes lead to a loss of individual accountability or a tendency towards institutional caution over bold truth-telling?
That's the heart of the critique. It's a searching question about how these bodies function in the real world.
So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. Building on all this, what responsibility do we, the faithful, actually have here?
That's a great question.
How can we support our own bishops to be those true shepherds, to be guided by the Holy Spirit, to use their God-given authority with courage and fidelity, even when navigating the tricky dynamics of a conference?
Yeah, what role do the laity play in fostering an environment where bishops feel empowered to speak truth, uphold doctrine, and really lead without feeling, boxed in by external pressures or internal conference politics?
It's something for all of us to think about, isn't it? How the whole church structure, including us, can best serve the mission today.
Absolutely. And the source rightly concludes with a call to prayer for our bishops, that they will be those courageous, faithful shepherds focused solely on the salvation of souls.
A vital prayer.
Mm.
This discussion has certainly highlighted the challenges and the importance of their role, and there's always more to learn, more to understand.
There is. And you can find much more of this kind of thoughtful analysis
On Epistles Online.
exactly. www.epistles.online. It really is such a valuable place for getting that clear, balanced, faithful perspective we talked about. Not modernist, not ultra-traditionalist, just solid.
So we strongly encourage you. Visit the website, www.epistles.online. Subscribe there for more in-depth content. And, of course, make sure you're subscribed to the Catholic Epistles podcast on whatever app you're using right now.
And please remember the author behind it all. He pours himself into this work, this apostolate, making sure this analysis is freely available.
That's right. So if you found this deep dive helpful, if it gave you something to think about, please consider supporting his mission. Any help you can offer allows this important work to continue, benefiting everyone seeking clarity and truth.
Your support really does keep it going.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive today. It's been a fascinating discussion.
It really has.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the truths that matter.